Greetings and salutations, and welcome to Radio Dayz, a podcast radio program that delves into the world of terrestrial radio. It's DJs and on-air personality, and you, all fans of radio as a medium. Here's your host, Ron.
Hello and welcome to Radio Dayz the Podcast. Of course, you can hear this podcast on Buzzsprout and all the major podcast platforms. And you can also watch this podcast via YouTube and at ronrobinsonstudios.com. FYI, I have some amazing guests coming up for you in the weeks and months ahead who will tell their story and discuss their careers in and around radio. So don't forget to make Radio Dayz the Podcast a place where you come back to every week. Another specialty show for you today, and I really think you're going to like the content you're about to consume because to me, the audio air checks that aired on terrestrial radio from times long past are true time capsules, in my opinion, are true time capsules that showcase how people lived and, more importantly, what they cared about. So with that in mind, on today's episode, which is brought to you by Team 71 Mortgage Group and Radio Dayz the Movie, we're going to take a listen to the top 10 radio air checks that I discovered while producing Radio Dayz the Docuseries. In the process of trying to tell the story of radio and its history from its inception in 1920 through all of the many eras of radio to current day, I've scanned through hundreds, if not thousands, of radio air checks from just about every decade radio has been in existence. And as many as there is, it's a small percentage of what happened. So there's a lot of content out there, but there's also a lot of content that just doesn't exist anymore. And let me tell you, some of the current existing radio air checks that you're going to hear are going to make you stop in your tracks, I promise you, and you're going to enjoy it. Very entertaining, serious, lighthearted, entertaining. But again, in today's episode, I'm going to present the top 10 radio air checks that I discovered while producing Radio Dayz the Docuseries. Now, I did disqualify content that there's a lot of stuff out there, like there's nothing from 9/11 or anything like that, just because there's so much out there. But, you know, the ones I selected are my personal favorite. And if you ask me next week, I'll probably select a different 10. But yeah, so today we're going to take a look at the top 10 air checks from the radio that I've scanned through while doing this docuseries. And to help me scan through these top 10, I went big. I asked one of the biggest legends in Detroit rock radio. I asked, he said yes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the casual one, Mr. Ken Calvert. Ken, how are you, sir?
Ron, it's a pleasure to be here, and pardon your Freudian slip moments ago when you said a lightheaded look at... that's a reference to yours truly, the light-headed one, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, though. It's good. This is a really exciting thing that you're putting together, and I know it's been a passion. It's been more than just a little bit of a pastime. It's been everything you've got in the tank right now, and you're doing a wonderful job. So with that said up front,
thank you.
Feel free to riddle away with anything that I haven't heard about. As you know, I dare say that I like to think that there's no greater radio fan on the face of the earth than me, because when I started as a young kid, I mean a little kid, something like a magnet drew me to the sound of a radio. So let's get it going.
I should add that if you want to hear me interview Ken about his radio career, you can check that. I've already done that. Check out episode 1 and episode 2 of this third season. And so, yeah, we should probably get started, but I've just been told while you were talking that, there's an honorable mention. So before we get to number 10, I guess this one goes to, 11.
I wanna rock and roll all night and party every day.
How mellow.
Paul?
Yay.
How are you, friend?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I have no complaints at all.
Well, then that makes two of us.
Yeah, where are you right now?
I'm in Philadelphia.
Paul Stanley joins us now. Day off, or are you working tonight?
Actually, tonight is off.
So there you are interviewing Paul Stanley, and you are, you're known for interviewing like everybody. Anybody who is everybody got interviewed by Ken Calvert. Do you have, obviously that must have been a fun interview, but do you have any favorites that you remember interviewing on the radio?
Oh, boy. You bet I do. I my all-time favorite was Don Henley because it was so good, so bad. I mean, it was really, I gotta believe that it was very tough for the listener to hear me go through what I was going through with Don Henley. But by the end of the interview, I had broken him like a stallion. He desperately wanted to just hate my guts. But as much as he hated the interview that we were doing, he wouldn't hang up. And he didn't know whether or not to fight with me, to just cave in or hang up or what. But the bottom line was, I asked him a simple question. We were talking about the album The End of Innocence, his solo album, his incredible solo album. And I said to him something like, do you consider this to be the best work you've ever done? And he said, why would you ask me that? And I said, well, because of the fact that it's so good. You drop a needle on it and you just go one side to the other, and it's just, to me as a listener, it's flawless. And he went, well, nothing is flawless or something like that. Anyway, that's where the sparring began. And at some point I said, then let me ask you this, is this the happiest you've ever been? And that's when he really got cheesed off. He said, who are you? Oprah? What is this? Is that? And he really got upset. And I said, okay, I'm sorry. I for some reason, and I said, first of all, let me remind you of something. Your people, and certainly not you, I can tell that now, Don, your people, not ours, reached out to us to do this interview that we're doing right now. And I can trust you enough by now to say, by God, I'm going to air this sucker, every single second of it. All right, so if you want to start over, fine. If you don't, that's fine too. I asked you two simple questions. Number one was, is this the best solo work you've ever done? Number two, is this the happiest you've ever been? I said, okay, granted, we're kind of in a sandbox with questions like that. But sometimes you never know. You may just get a nugget. And I think I just got a nugget. So, and I know that you dug it. So why don't you tell me a little bit about The End of Innocence from your point of view? And he really he was so taken aback by that he said, he couldn't say to me anymore, why would you ask me that? You know what I mean? It was like, now he's got to answer some question at some point. And he finally started to come around and say, I said, let me just do this. How long has that album been in the works? And he goes, oh, man. I don't know, Ken. I'd say it's been, well, parts of it have been in my head and in my bus and in my guitar case, and had a drum kit for 20 years. And I was like, now we're getting there. Now we're rolling. And so by the end of it, he didn't know whether to thank me or really curse me out. But either way, we got it done. I ran the interview. I still have parts of the interview, most of the good stuff. But 48 hours later, a FedEx truck pulls up to the radio station. And a person that worked at the radio station walks to the back studio where WCSX is and hands me this box from FedEx, and it's like, oh, open it, I want to see what's inside. It says Don Henley on it. And I went, oh, really? I said, okay, no, maybe you don't want to be in the studio. And I'm sorry, but let's open her up. Inside was the most gorgeous, and I still have it, cocktail book, Walden Pond. He's a huge, huge supporter of preserving Walden Pond. And it's huge. It's huge. It's a very, very big coffee table book. And then he wrote me a letter. And I have the letter hanging on that wall. And I wish I could take it over and show it to you. Or I wish I would have had it. I didn't think about this at the time. It's a really, I can't say it's a beautiful letter. It's a funny letter, and it's only funny between him and I, because of what
Sure.
he says in it. But it's one of my prized possessions from Don Henley. So Don Henley, to this day, was the toughest but the greatest interview. Maybe not the greatest, but one of the best interviews I've ever done, because I refused to just panic. That's when I knew
Right.
I could do anybody at that point, because of Don Henley.
Makes me wish I would have had that one. It makes me wish I would have had that clip instead of the Paul Stanley. But you did so many. I mean, there's just, and again, that goes to my point. As many interviews as you did, there's only audio of a few still out there. So,
Yeah,
all right,
and-
let's get into the top 10. Go ahead, Ken.
let's do that. I was going to say, let's see what you got for me. Shake me down,
All
man.
right, here at number 10 is a clip. Now, what I did try to do is I did try to capture at least one from every different era. So, obviously, radio got its early beginnings in the 1920s. Arguably, one of the first celebrities that was spawned from radio was Father Charles Coughlin, who Coughlin was from WJR. So, here at number 10 is the very polarizing Father Charles Coughlin.
And therefore, choosing right instead of might, choosing to be on the side of justice instead of on the side of modern capitalism with its intermingling with socialism and communism, I stand before you tonight to warn you that this relief that has failed to relieve, by pounding up its taxation, by doubling its assessment upon the payrolls of the nation, by finding its way into the grocer shops where you purchase your food. You think you know what depression is? You people living on the WPA envelopes. WPA envelopes filled partly from the money confiscated from industry and commerce, and from the envelopes of those who are working. How long can that last? You WPA workers and those of you who are living upon the dole system, how long can it last for this Federal Reserve Bank to invent and coin and issue its own bogus money against the debts of a nation, and then when the bond market drops as it's dropping now, print more fresh $5 bills to buy in its own bonds? Oh, there's a law of compensation, and there's an accounting to be held, an accounting that shall make the Depression of 1929 seem as a prosperity when it breaks upon you.
Now, that's an interesting clip, Ken, because when I was interviewing Dick Purton, he told me he actually had the occasion to meet Father Coughlin, which I found fascinating because he was an older man. But obviously he's a lore now. But when you were getting started in broadcasting, what did you know about Father Coughlin, if anything?
I knew about him because of my parents. I knew about him because of my parents. And my parents knew about him because of my grandparents. Back in it was in the 30s, I know that for a fact. Early to mid 30s. And so let's just say 1934, 33, 34. He was and I'm Canadian American, by the way. So I know this fact as well. Father Coughlin is Canadian American. And
right.
So my father was very excited about that. He would literally, the United States at that time, 100 million people total in the entire country, to which he reached out to 30 million people. Think about that. Basically, a third of the United States of America was listening to Father Coughlin at what we have here in Detroit, the Detroit area, Woodward Avenue, and he literally, he built the Shrine of the Little Flower. And the Shrine of the Little Flower is still there. In fact, the speakers, people would assemble around the church to hear these speeches. These
right.
Well, they were greater than speeches. I mean, he went off. And he became, basically, he went from basically talking about the gospel of Jesus Christ as told by the Catholicism or the Catholic point of view, to becoming very political. He was pro-FDR, then he was anti-FDR. He was without, there's no doubt he was an anti-Semite I mean, he had his issues, but he was extremely popular.
And it made people look in the mirror because, as you mentioned, he was very popular. Then he became very anti-FDR. In fact, that clip we heard was him complaining about the New Deal.
Yep. That's the deal that flipped him, by the way. That was the deal that flipped him on FDR. He was, forever, he went from being a unifier to being one of the most divisive people in the United States.
And he was because you could tell he was just a great speaker. And at that time, there was no television. This is where people got all their media.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, remarkable. And, but imagine that. Imagine an audience. Well, we're over 300 million now in the United States. Imagine having a radio program where 100 million people tuned in. Now, you talk about the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Not even close. Not even close. So
this next clip, Ken, is also a time when, television was an infant, so a lot of people were still getting their news from the radio, all their entertainment, all their information, media, serious, entertaining. But this one is interesting because this was Edward R. Murrow, who got his fame probably from this particular clip. This is Edward R. Murrow reporting during a German blitz in 1940. Take a listen.
The plane is still very high, and it's quite clear that he's not coming in for his bombing run. Earlier this evening, we could hear occasionally, again, those were explosions overhead. Earlier this evening, we heard a number of bombs go sliding and slithering across to fall several blocks away. Just overhead now, the burst of the anti-aircraft fire. Still, the nearby guns are not working. And the searchlights now are feeling almost directly overhead. Now you'll hear two bursts a little nearer in a moment. There they are. That hard, stony sound.
These clips are truly fascinating, Ken, because you really get a glimpse of if someone's just listening to the radio and listening for the news and they're hearing this and they're hearing all those sounds that are going on in the background. And it just, I can't even imagine how that would have hit somebody's ears back in 1940.
Wow, that truly is an incredible clip that you just ran there. The Edward R. Murrow clip there. I mean, imagine being embedded in as the war is sounding like all hell is breaking loose, and it is, and we don't have, the every picture tells a story. It's all done now. It's no longer theater of the mind. It's theater with your words, and you're in the theater. You're describing the theater. And you can only imagine people sitting on the edge of their seats, as they're listening to this. It's beyond exciting. It's for people. It was a way to travel. It was time traveling. It was place traveling. It was occasion traveling. In that case, World War II. And the guy had the cojones to stay with it, deliver it, and do it, and wore the uniform and carried a microphone instead of a weapon. I mean, incredible. Absolutely. And that was, again, good clip, great clip, because of the fact that you have to describe to the people the genesis of radio.
Yeah. All right. Well, this next clip is also a news clip that I've always been fascinated with. I can't remember the first time I heard it, but it's almost kind of become a parody because of the Thanksgiving episode of WKRP in Cincinnati. But it's the Hindenburg disaster that happened in near Chicago. So here is a small clip of that radio broadcast as it happened in real time. Here you go. Take a listen to the Hindenburg disaster report.
There are a number of important persons on board, and no doubt the new commander, Captain Max Frisk, is thrilled, too, for this is his great moment, the first time he's commanded the Hindenburg, for in previous flights he acted as a chief officer under Captain Lehman. It's practically standing still now. They've dropped ropes out of the nose of the ship, and has been taken a hold of down on the field by a number of men. It's starting to rain again. The rain had scratched up a little bit. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from... It burst into flame. It burst into flame and it's falling. It's crashing. Watch it. Get out of the way. Get this, Charlie. It's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh, my. Get out of the way, please. It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's flaking 400 or 500 feet into the sky. It's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. The smoke and the flames now, and the frame is crashing to the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. All the humanity and all the planets are screaming around here. I told you, I can't even talk to people. There's planes out there. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen. Honest, it's just laying there, a massive smoking wreckage. And everybody can't hardly breathe and talk and screaming. Lady, I'm sorry. Honestly, I can hardly breathe. I'm going to step inside where I cannot see it. Sorry, that's terrible. Listen, folks, I'm going to have to stop for a minute because I've lost my voice. This is the worst thing I've ever witnessed.
Now, there's a clip that has got... It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's really not a very long clip from, oh, look at the majestic airship. Oh, look at it. And imagine all of the people. And now the guys secure it, and soon we'll be looking at the people getting off. And then all of a sudden, boink, hits a pole, and just totally evaporates in flame. Yeah. And the defining line in that, of course, is, oh, the humanity, Yeah.
Well, I mean, what I find fascinating, I mean, I just played some clips from what led up to World War II, but this happened in 1937, so the world hadn't gone through that grittiness of war yet. So there was, I mean, you want to talk about a very young time in our country and naive time, and to hear that kind of horrific thing on the radio must have been horrible.
Well, not only that, but the backstory to that airship is, I mean, that was a Carnival cruise being carried by a balloon. I mean, there were dining rooms, there were staircases, there were cabins, it was amazing that this thing floated across Europe, gigantic in size. Imagine it pulling up. Imagine seeing the beginning of it. We sort of went through that recently with that Chinese weather balloon, didn't we? There was a little of that going on as well. It's still to this day it's going on. But imagine, and then just to see this thing explode, and all of the people running from it, on the ground crews and the reporters and the people there too. Oh,
my first exposure to it was the cover of a Led Zeppelin record. That was the first time I ever heard of anything.
No kidding. Yeah.
All right. Moving on to number 7, a little bit more lighthearted. Somebody that made his name in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even after television came along, Jack Benny was the toast of the town on radio airwaves.
That was I Got a Gal in Kalamazoo, played by Phil Harris in the orchestra. And speaking of Kalamazoo, ladies, whether you're a gal in Kalamazoo or Kankakoo,
oh, Brother Roo,
why not serve your husband a bang-up breakfast treat? Just try him on Grapes Nuts Flakes.
There you go again. Don, that's great.
And now let us continue with our story of what happened when the 2 cadets from Santa Ana visited Jack in Beverly Hills. As we left Jack, he had been knocked cold by a tap from a tiny pot.
Look at that lump on my head. I'm glad Phil took the baby home. Believe me, the next time that kid starts after me, I'm going to be set. I'm going to be ready.
Oh, put your fist down, killer.
Well, I'm mad. Come on, let's take these bottles over to the market. You take the bottles out, Rochester. I'll answer the door.
In our house as kids growing up, when Jack Benny, Jack, when he would be on like the Tonight Show, at the time it was Jack Parr and then Johnny Carson, but I do remember a little bit of when Jack Parr was the host. And when he was on, that was one of those deals where everybody shuts up in the Calvert household because my dad loved Jack Benny so much. I mean, just absolutely loved him. Always had the violin, but never really played it. And when he did, he'd squeak out a number. And but just absolutely the greatest deadpan artist maybe in the history of Hollywood. But man, he made a lot of people laugh. Woof.
One of the earliest influences as far as a radio personality was well before I was a huge radio listener was Wolfman Jack. He was all over my childhood from the movies and television. Here, he's always been one of the pioneers of radio from a national perspective, not the local people, but from a national perspective, because he was in, this movie, that movie. But here's a clip from Wolfman Jack.
Yo, Wolfman, on CJCH, the Big 92 here in Halifax. And I tell you, Terry Williams, he's the program director. He picked me up out of the airport. And also Randy was with him, too. And he's going to be doing something with me later on, Randy Duell. He's coming back on the air here tonight. As a matter of fact, he's starting tonight, man, at 8 o'clock. And old Randy looking good. Put on a few pounds, I think, didn't you, Randy? Huh?
A touch.
Just a touch. But he's still looking good, girls. And the old Wolfman is here live in person tonight. I'm here in Halifax, and I'm going to be here with you tonight. We're going to be over at the Dartmouth Academy later on, around 9 o'clock. And we're going to be visiting over there. We ain't doing no show or nothing, but we're going to be visiting over there, just saying hi to the folks. And we're going to go and say hi to the folks over there at Dartmouth High School, too. Be over there around 9:30 sometime in that neighborhood, So you come and see us real soon, will you please?
What are your thoughts on Wolfman Jack? As someone who did, who followed in his footsteps, not per se his footsteps, but came after him, that was a different era of being a DJ, wasn't it?
That was pirate radio. He was the king of the mountain for so many different reasons. I mean, for him to broadcast the way he did, literally, when they say pirate radio, well, that's what they did. They went out into open waters and had a ship and literally, a boat, a floating boat, and they did what was considered to be pirate radio because there wasn't a W, there wasn't a K, there was an X or whatever they wanted to do, and they played whatever they wanted, and they weren't beholden to the advertiser. So Wolfman not only was a rule breaker, he was a rule maker in terms of really telling people, if you want to do this thing, baby, you gotta get a little Wolfman in the pipes, or whatever it is. That's probably...
That was pretty good.
Yeah. But and he had, God, I remember there's an event in Detroit. Well, this event is done all around the country, Autorama or World of Wheels. And for many years, I'd say for 15 years, I was the voice of Autorama World of Wheels. Yeah. It's the all-new World of Wheels. The kids will love the Tiny Toons. And this year, and one of the regular guys during and post radio, from the Midnight Special, Wolfman Jack. And I never met Wolfman Jack. I was in the same building at the time. I was broadcasting live, and he was one of the drop-ins, get a couple $100, then go back to the hotel, and then get back on an airplane and go. But probably one of the... I'm told by my peers that did get to know him somewhat. Wonderful guy. Wonderful guy. Especially wonderful if you were a broadcaster, wanted to know all about the music you were playing, and wanted to know all about your style and what made you special. And I like that. What makes you special? And
I can tell you that's a great segue into a very special radio station, a station that I know you grew up listening to. But this clip at number 5 has John Lennon calling into Keener after the infamous rumor, is Paul dead? Take a listen.
John Lennon, there is no doubt in your mind about the fate of Paul McCartney.
No, it's a joke, isn't it? I mean, Paul isn't dead, and if he was, we would have told you, We'd be the first to know.
Well, that's it.
He's opening for the baby. He's recording music for Ringo's film and producing Mary Hopkins, so he's very much alive.
Well, how did the rumors affect both of you at this point?
It's a joke to us. It's just a joke.
It's so hard to believe that something like this would be going on, similar to like a James Dean thing.
I can't understand it, because I can understand the James Dean he still lived, crippled, but won't come out, I mean, there's some kind of idea you could guess, well, maybe.
Yeah.
But Paul McCartney couldn't die without the world knowing it.
Mm-hmm.
The same as he couldn't get married without the world knowing it. It's impossible. He can't go on holiday without the world knowing it. How could he die without everybody knowing it?
Paul McCartney is in England now. Is he at home, or is he on a holiday, or what, John?
He's not on holiday. He's working. He's recording a group called the Ivies, but doing some background music for Ringo's film, The Magic Christian. Mm-hmm. And I want to be plugging my own stuff, not Paul, so come on, let's get going.
Well, since you're doing a lot of plugging, what is John Lennon up to?
Well, we've got a new single, folks, called Cold Turkey.
What's your take on that whole Paul is dead? People sometimes forget about that scandal in radio, but that started at Keener, if I'm not mistaken, right? That Paul McCartney was dead?
Boy, I'll tell you what, it was bigger than anything. It was bigger than all life in our household, the Calvert household. I had 2 older sisters and the Sasty Nisters. And we would sit around the radio at night listening to Keener. And I think it was like Scotty Regan, and it was crossing over at the time as well. Lee Allen had no choice but to get involved. And I believe that Lee at the time was on 1270 WXYZ, Club 1270. And so it was the Keener-Wixie Wars, but the whole thing started in, I think it was 1966. And how it evolved was basically from a college newspaper, and it started somewhere, I believe, in Illinois, and then worked its way into Ann Arbor. I don't know. I can't put together all the pieces, but I've done it many times, and I should remember it, but I don't. But it was real. It was big. When people started finding the sounds and being able to broadcast the actual sound, Paul is, well, I Buried Paul. When you take the outro, right, what is really the second outro to Strawberry Fields, which is already backwards, and you actually end up hearing, I buried Paul. I buried Paul.
That's real?
Well, if you listen to it, it sure sounds like it. But, and there's, to this day, there are arguments over what he's saying. And because the song Strawberry Fields ends, and then it comes back and ends a second time, and that is, the music is reversed, so it goes all over the map. But at the very end of that, as the drums are drumming backwards, you hear, I buried Paul. I buried Paul. And so the kids were like, there it is, it's for real. They took all of the album covers, the one album cover, well, Abbey Road, of course, where Paul is walking across the street in bare feet. When they bury people, I guess, apparently they don't put shoes or socks on people, and they always buried people in their bare feet. So he had bare feet. The other was in, I forget the Beatles album, where Paul is inside a music case, and the rest of the guys are leaning on the music case. That was a coffin. That was the coffin reference. See, the Beatles were in on it, so they were just these subtle clues everywhere. And then I believe the best was the number 9. When you played that backwards, it was, turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man. Turn me on, dead man. So I just got to say one thing. one time when I was doing morning radio, after the show, I don't know if anything, I don't know if we may have smoked something or not. I can't say because I can't remember. But I went into the studio and I just kept saying, number 9, number 9, number 9. And then I flipped over the tape, and it was with one of the engineers. It was a WRIF. And we each had, at the time we weren't allowed to have VU meters, which was interesting. And at one time there was actually record spinners. You could only talk. But I digress. So Eddie Derschmidt and I, or Eddie Derschmidt and me, no, Eddie Derschmidt and I went into the studio and flipped it right over. And I got to tell you that my number 9 did not sound anything like Turn Me On, Deadman. Turn Me On, Deadman. But we got laughing. It's one of my favorite memories. Eddie, where are you now, man? Those were the days. But that was the hijinks back then. So,
well, that's a perfect segue into number 4.
Number 4.
Because another one of my
number 4.
Number 4.
Number 4
is a radio legend in his own right, Paul Harvey. Here's Paul Harvey talking about a story about how somebody learned to play the guitar heavily influenced by the Beatles. Take a listen to Paul Harvey's rest of the story.
Now, the rest of the story. April 1962, the tomb-like confines of McNeil Island Penitentiary came alive with intense whispers. Creepy was coming. After more than a quarter century in Alcatraz, more time than any other con had ever served on the Rock, Creepy was being transferred to McNeil Island, the no-nonsense United States Penitentiary near Tacoma, Washington. McNeil Island inmates speculated eagerly, almost anxiously, as to what Creepy would be like after all of these years. How would he act? What would he say? For few bad guys in the history of crime had been more wanted while at large or more legendary behind bars than had Creepy, the haunty-eyed, pasty-faced public enemy number 1, personally apprehended by J. Edgar Hoover himself, the last surviving member of the notorious Barker gang, Ma Barker's adopted son, Alvin Karpis. Yes, you met him during a previous visit. And of all of the prisoners at McNeil Island, one 26-year-old felon was most fascinated by the prospect of meeting this living legend, and that young inmate's name was Chuck. And that brings us to the rest of the story. Not long after Karpis arrived at McNeil Island, Chuck approached him and struck up a friendship with the aging gangster. Somebody had mentioned that Karpis could play the steel guitar. Chuck said, "Can you teach me?" Karpis agreed, and during the hours the two spent together, Chuck learned much about his infamous new friend. On August 7 of 1936, the big door slammed behind Al Karpis on the Rock. The last of the big-name Depression-era public enemies had been put away for life. It was all an intriguing story to the young ears of that inmate Chuck, and a story he would never forget. 7 years later, California's Benedict Kenyon ran red with the blood of a Hollywood movie star and her friends. And that day, Chuck, the fawning disciple who once sat at the feet of Alvin Karpis, outdistanced his mentor in infamy. They thought Karpis was creepy. Well, the protege, whom he taught to play guitar, the cellmate, Chuck, whom he had inspired in the spring of 1962, was Charles Manson. Now you know the rest of the story.
Hello, Americans. Stand by for news. Paul Harvey here. Good day.
That's pretty good. Now you're a big fan of Paul Harvey, aren't you?
Oh, huge. There's another guy. He did live reads better than any human on the planet. You didn't know he was setting aside the news to talk about something. He would tell the story and then say, "Oh, looking forward to taking it out for the wash." And whatever it would be like, Jack's Car Wash or something. I don't know, but he would just he had the blendability better than any human I know to go from doing a radio program to selling you something, and you didn't even realize he was already talking about life insurance. You know, and how can you not want to just take $1 a day and put it away? I know we do at the Harvey household. You know, he had a little Barney Fife in him, actually, with a deep voice. You know, if Barney Fife, if you think about it now, I know that you're looking at me like I'm insane, Ron, but Paul Harvey was sort of a Barney Fife. You know, Andy, if it, you know, you've got to nip it in the bud. Nip it in the bud.
Barney Fife. Yeah.
Oh, he was very smart. Well, Barney Fife was pretty smart, even though he didn't seem like it on every occasion, especially with Otis the Drunk. But Paul Harvey, anyway, there were people that would literally pull off the road and listen to Paul Harvey, have their lunch with Paul Harvey. It was really brilliant radio, and the one thing I've always loved about live radio, and we did it at WRIF, which was an ABC O&O, we had to hit the news, which was live at the top of the hour. And they had a sort of a rock blended newscast with a guy who wasn't so newsy, if you will. And I remember we would have to hit that post, and I loved that. And the same thing was at WJR at the top of the hour at 12 noon. Or maybe it was 12:05. I'm not sure. But you would come out of it, and then you would say something like, and currently in the Motor City, it's 41 degrees. Hello, Americans. Paul Harvey, stand by for news. And it was, you know.
And when you hit that marker, boom, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I was working at a station called WSJM, and you got to hit that marker because Paul Harvey's coming in live, and there's nothing you can do.
If you walked on the national talent, you know. Okay, continue, please.
Number 3, from one national news to something that started on the Canadian side, became legendary in Detroit. 2020 news. Take a listen.
20 minutes before 1, this is Grant Hudson, CKLW 2020 News. You heard this first on the Big 8. Accommodations are getting tighter at the Wayne County morgue as officials stare at 16 new feet peeking out from under those rubber blankets. 8 murders since midnight, 3 of them happening a short time ago in an attempted quadruple blow-off.
The address is 9100 at LaSalle Boulevard, corner of Claremont. I heard the police officer telling the apparently one of the people who was shot, that her sister, that they were shot through the head, you know.
2 women are dead, 1 man is dead, another man now under the knife at the emergency room at Ford Hospital, all suffering multiple stab wounds. They weren't shot, officials tell the Big 8.
There are some signs of ransacking in the house. The bodies reflect stab wounds. There is one survivor who is now at Ford Hospital.
Another deadly duo of Detroit dastardly deeds is the Dice decree death, a disagreement over 7-11. Now she's in heaven. The man who delivered that double-barreled death with his package of penetrating pellets has been pounced in the pen. In another case of hot lead in the head, a heavy-handed hitchhiker tipped with a trigger and paid his bill in bullets. More violence on Cyprus as the U.S. ambassador is shot and killed.
What's your thought on that? That's some bombastic news right there.
Well, they called it bloody, bloody news. And it was CKLW 2020 News. Byron McGregor. Little Bobby Benson wanted to be a big league ball player. Well, he got his chance. He got a ball and bat. Problem is, use the bat on younger brother Billy's head, and now he'll be walking with the gumshoes to the Crowbar Motel. How's that?
That's really good. That's really good. All right, moving on to number 2. Somebody that doesn't get nearly as much love because, and rightfully so. I mean, there's so many legends of people that you've done what you do with. there's lots of names. We could go on forever. But one of my favorites growing up was a guy by the name of Carl Coffey. Here's Carl Coffey in action.
WRIF Detroit, Steely Dan right there out of Asia, and they call it Deacon Blues. Giles Band doing the Southside Shuffle, y'all. Steve Miller Band, Jungle Love, Alice Cooper from the Coops LP, Alice Cooper Goes to Hell, and I Am Guilty, Hot Legs, Rod Stewart from Footloose and Fancy Free. Sunday night at 9, a full hour of rock and roll from Rodney Stewart. Really, it's Roderick Stewart. That's a complete hour. Rod Stewart at his best. Sunday evening at 9 right here on Detroit's Best, 101 WRIF. I'm Carl Coffey, and this is the Jefferson Starship.
What's your take on that cut, and what's your take on Carl Coffey, Ken?
Well, I'm sad now because I knew Carl very, very, very well. And Carl Coffey. And you're, well, I mean, his name worked with every day party he ever did. I mean, when I first met Carl was when I started at WRIF in 1979. Had no idea he was a Vietnam vet. He kept that to himself. He was very, very private. He wasn't private about it. It explains now a lot of what I've gotten to understand with Vietnam vets, how they feel about life in general and how they felt coming home from such an ugly, ugly war. And well, I won't go there, but anyway, Carl never did that. Carl was very proud to serve, and God bless him for that. We just lost him within the last year here. Carl was a wonderful, delightful soul, and there was a smile about Carl that was contagious. I can't say anything bad about Carl Coffey. Right up recently as 2 years ago, he would always be at the Saturday fruit market in Royal Oak, Michigan, and my wife and I would go up there, and she'd go one way and I'd go the other. And Carl had one of the booths outside, so it got a little cold on occasion, but he had his old pickup truck, and he had a flatbed behind it, and he had a little bit of everything. Some gourds, he had some corn, he had some tomatoes, he'd get to the pumpkin stage, and you didn't pay too much when you're Ken Calvert getting together with Carl Coffey and walking away with a couple of tomatoes, let's put it that way. But all of a sudden, I didn't see Carl one Sunday, and it's not a song, but it'll sound like one. I noticed the next week he wasn't there, and I said, something's up. I wonder why Carl stopped coming. And I found out later that he wasn't doing well, and shortly thereafter he passed away. So, great man, great voice, great talent. Did television VOs for Channel 4 here locally forever. Did a lot of voiceover work, but he was just a gentle soul, and I think he did radio up until the last year of his life. So may he rest in peace. He was a good one,
Another great man, another great broadcaster, and another, I don't know how well you knew the man, but one of the reasons that I got into radio, in addition to yourself and a few other names that were heroes of mine when I was growing up, is J.P. McCarthy. I never got to meet him, but here's a nice clip of J.P. McCarthy.
Mr. President, a year and a half ago, immediately following the Persian Gulf War and for a couple of months thereafter, you could have been reelected by acclamation. There would have been no need for a referendum. What happened? I know you've thought about that.
The economy and the Democratic leadership. The Democratic leadership in Congress decided the only way we can possibly win is to stop any progress for this economy. And the bills that I put in to try to stimulate investment and savings were blocked on pure partisan grounds. And then, of course, some of the friends in the media wanted to see a horse race. They feel much more comfortable personally with Clinton, and they've gone after me with a vengeance. But it's changing now because the American people are fair. And they'll say, listen, this president might make a mistake. If he does, he admits it. And besides that, he has our trust and confidence.
Did a morning show that virtually every single president, chair, board member of Ford, GM, Chrysler, Edison, whatever it was that was local here to Detroit, the bigwigs would always, they wouldn't think of missing a morning without Paul, or rather, excuse me, without J.P. McCarthy, since well replaced by the long-standing, Paul W. Smith. But J.P. McCarthy was one of a kind. He would do a half an hour on his golf game. He would do whatever he wanted, and people adored it. But I mean that sincerely. I remember when he died, all of Detroit and all of radio was in shock. I mean, I remember they bathed the Fisher Building in all green lights. People just, the freeways were packed going down just to look at it and to pay homage to J.P. McCarthy. And, it was interesting, too, because at the time, before they picked Paul W. Smith, I was one of the people that would rotate in and out of that chair in the morning. So that's probably the worst feeling as a broadcaster you could ever have. First of all, people are really missing J.P. McCarthy. And number two, who are you? And why should I have any interest in listening to you? But no, he was a great, great man, but I can't say that I knew him, but boy, did I know him. Because in radio, ratings are the key. Ratings are how radio stations made money and still do. And with J.P. McCarthy and that signal at WJR, they were perennial, and I mean perennial in terms of years. 10, 12, 13, 14 years of number one.
Ken, I want to thank you for coming on and helping me get through these. And again, I could come up with a different 10, but these are off the top of my head my favorite air checks. And it's cool to relive some of those air checks, isn't it?
Well, two things real quickly I learned. Number one, get a studio lamp or something. Never ever do a video podcast with a television on. And do it differently so that it doesn't look like you're missing a tooth over here or where. I actually have teeth, see people. So.
Well, you're ahead of the game. I remember growing up, my parents and all my friends' parents, they all had false teeth. I was like, what happened to these people's teeth? They're only 20 for crying out loud. None of them have teeth. So
well,
you're ahead of the game, sir.
You know what Soupy always said, right? Soupy Sales?
What's that?
Lunch with Soupy. As kids, we all grew up with Soupy Sales. Soupy always used to say, be true to your teeth, and they'll never be false to you. That's what we learned today on the Ron Robinson Podcast.
Thanks again to Ken Calvert, and thank you. I could let that roll for a while. Thank you for checking out Radio Dayz the Podcast. Today's show was brought to you by Team 71 Mortgage Group. Are you looking to buy or refinance your home and have questions that need answers now? Call Brian Allure at 810-444-6466, 810-444-6466. Today's show is produced by Ron Robinson Studios. If you need professional marketing videos, professional photography, maybe you need drone content, head over to ronrobinsonstudios.com. You can also hear previous episodes of this podcast there as well. And if you'd like to learn more about the upcoming docuseries about the history of radio with Ken is one of the big names that I have in this docuseries. Radio Dayz 101 Years of Radio, coming very, very soon. If you want to find out more, click on the Radio Dayz the Movie icon under the documentaries tab at, you guessed it, ronrobinsonstudios.com. Thanks for checking out the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time.
You can't go. All the plants are going to die.